Okay, so let's see. It's kind of hard to see Zoom screens through binoculars. Gavin and Graham, are you guys there?
Hey, Marisa.
Marisa.
Hey, can you like flail about a little so I can?
Can you see us?
Oh yeah, do see that. Yeah, I thought that I should bring my binoculars since we're going on a road trip to see some cool things, but oh, it's much easier without them. So maybe I'll put them away for now until we get traveling. But I'm all ready. I got my sun protection on, and I figured since we're in Santa Cruz, first stop is probably the boardwalk, right?
Well, Marisa, we're going to talk about geologic landmarks today, and some close to home, but not exactly on the boardwalk.
Okay, cool. So maybe I should go somewhere else, like maybe, let me see. I think I've got some other options here. No, it's easier actually just doing this by car than by Zoom is what I'm learning. Okay, so maybe it's something like this.
Well, closer, much closer. We're going to talk about arches today, and that kind of is going to get us into it.
Okay, yeah. Cool. Well, I can't wait to hear all about it. 'Tis the season for traveling around the country and seeing new things.
That's right. And we're going to start in a place with an arch, just like our own natural bridges. But you might be surprised to learn how these arches form. And then on our road trip, we're going to hit a bunch of other great geologic landmarks in the western half of this country. So yeah, without further ado, let's hit the road and head to arches.
Oh, Graham, I'm so excited for today. All of these geologic landmarks are cool and unique in their own way. And the overarching theme is going to be that these are all very great geologic coincidences. So what better place to start than Arches National Park? And if you follow our blog series, the Rock Record, which is also on the museum's website, you'll see that we wrote a little primer for this week's Rockin Pop-Up on that blog, and we talk a little about Arches National Park. So, Graham, Arches National Park has these peculiar and very precariously placed geologic landforms. You see that we have Delicate Arch in this picture on the left, and then you have these like boulders up on these pillars, and they're all forming in these like very interestingly eroded ridges. And so in order to understand them, you really have to understand how they formed. So let's dive into that, shall we?
All right. Well, Gavin, if I know something about arches from the Rockin Pop-Ups we've done here in Santa Cruz, it's all got to be wave action, right? Those waves are hitting and refracting off the coastline, right?
Well, Graham, the difference between these arches and the ones that you see in Arches National Park in Utah versus the ones that we have in Santa Cruz, like at Natural Bridges, is that Utah's not that close to the ocean. And so unlike
there.
Yeah. So these actually have more to do with tectonics and erosion. So let's just jump into it. Arch formation starts with salt. And so what happened was that 300 million years ago in Utah, where these arches formed, you had this inland basin filled with water. And that water had a bunch of salt in it. And instead of flowing out to sea, it just evaporated. And on top of the bedrock there, it formed this big, thick salt bed. Now, the thing about salt beds, Graham, is that they're really easy to deform. So when you squeeze them with tectonic forces like the ones that have happened in the subsequent 300 million years on the West Coast, the ones that built California, when you squeeze them, they erode and deform up, and they kind of get shot up close to the surface. Now, what happens is that all of the sandstone that was deposited on those salt beds in the subsequent 300 million years is deformed with them, and they have these big folds, which when they're convex, or concave, is it, Graham? Concave, convex, when they go this way.
I always mix those up. I'm the worst person to ask. I'm so sorry.
Not important. Anyway, we call them anticlines when they go this way. And So what happens is that you have these big anticlines that are over 10 miles long in some cases, and they erode on the top. And what you're left with are these sandstones that are at a high angle that are on the flanks of that fold.
Okay.
And so you start off with that tectonic action and you erode those, and you're left with these geologic features called fins.
Oh.
Still not close to the ocean, but they are called fins. And they're basically the flanks of that big fold. And they're just sandstone layers that are at really high angles. And it's from those sandstone layers that we get arches. You can see in these two pictures here on the top left, those are our high angle fins. And then in this cartoon in the bottom left, that's sort of the life cycle. If you start off with fins and you get arches in between them. And if you look at delicate arch from far away, that's the same arch that we have behind us today. That is not just on its own, it's actually on top of this big, wide sandstone fin. And so, Graham, that still doesn't tell us why you go from a fin to having like a hole in the middle, like an arch, right? And so there is but one process that will do that. What is it?
Oh, it's erosion. It is the stuff, those processes that make the Earth's surface so thrilling and dynamic. And so, Gavin, there is just this drama, this geologic drama playing out before our eyes here. What is happening to make these fins?
Geologic drama is the best kind of drama, Graham.
Right.
And what happens is that I was a little lazy before. I told you that it was sandstone that was deposited on top of those salt layers, but it's not perfectly homogeneous sandstone. In some cases, you have these tiny little lenses, these tiny little layers of mudstone shale is what we call it. And those layers are much less competent. They're much more easily deformable than the sandstone in the fins. And so when you squeeze the fins with tectonic forces, all of the rocks move along those shale layers. And what happens is that you get these areas, these specific areas within the fin that get more highly fractured than the rest of it. And so I point to that in blue here on this picture on the left. You have this motion along the shale layers, it fractures areas within those greater sandstone fins. And over time, wind pulls at those fractured areas and you are left with an arch. And so if you go underneath any of the arches at Arches National Park, you'll see sort of textures on the arch like the ones I show here on the top right. And those are the remnants of those fractures that are still in the arch today. It's just that the insides have been pulled out by erosion.
Awesome. Wow. Well, this was just a delightful trip to Utah and checking out arches. You know, Gavin, I feel a little homesick. Why don't we head back to California for a minute? And on our way, let's stop and visit Mono Lake. And what in goodness gracious is going on here on the shores of Mono Lake? What are these strange columns?
It looks like something out of a sci-fi movie, Graham. It really does. It's one of the weirdest geologic features I've personally seen, and those are the Tufa Towers. Now, before we get into the Tufa Towers, we should talk a little bit about Mono Lake, because Mono Lake has an interesting chemistry to it, and that's going to be key to making the Tufa Towers. So Mono Lake is in a basin, this flat area to the east side of the Sierra Nevada mountains. A lot of folks may have gone over past Yosemite Valley onto the east side, you pass Mono Lake. Mono Lake it has water that comes into it, but water can't escape from it. And so what you're left with is another really, really salty lake. We call these saline lakes or alkaline lakes. Suffice it to say, it's very, very salty. Now, Graham, is that the only water that enters Mono Lake? Is it in the top, or what's the key to these Tufa Towers?
Well, Gavin, so the water in Mono Lake is, as it starts out, it's really salty, but what happens is it's not just surface waters and that salty lake that's there, but there's also these groundwater springs that are coming up into the bottom of the lake. So we don't see them at the surface like we see some springs at the surface. Those are pumping up deep into the bottom of the lake. And what happens, Gavin, when that groundwater, that fresher groundwater full of carbon and all sorts of good stuff coming out of, out of those deep groundwater reservoirs. What happens when it hits that salty brine?
Well, Graham, as a lot of things in geochemistry go, when you mix things, cool chemistry reactions happen. And so when you mix these waters, they immediately precipitate the mineral calcite, which you might have heard us talk about on some of our previous Rockin Pop-Ups. So in that spring, as soon as the waters get to mixing, those groundwaters and the Mono Lake saline waters, they precipitate calcite. So as you can see in these schematics, you go from just the lake to spring, and right in those springs, you get these towers. So every single tufa is its own fossilized spring. But Graham, is it just a coincidence that you can see the tufas today? Like, if you're just mixing the waters, how do they get past the surface of the lake? That doesn't make any sense.
I was just about to ask you that question. How do we, I see in this image here, they're forming deep underwater, and this one certainly isn't underwater. So the lake level, has it fallen? What's making the lake level fall?
Well, Graham, this is sort of an intersection between human activity and geology. So decades ago, somewhere 60 to 80 years ago, the city of Los Angeles decided to divert some of the water from the Sierras down to LA for drinking water. And that water then couldn't travel to where it would normally go into Mono Lake, which caused Mono Lake, the level of the water in Mono Lake to drop significantly. So that's what this map is showing here on the left. You have different shades of blue. The lightest shade of blue is where Mono Lake used to be, and the darkest shade of blue is where it is now. So you've had tens of meters of lake level drop after you've diverted those waters away. So the tufa towers kind of stick out now just because they used to be underwater, but now the lake level has dropped.
Awesome. Wow, that's such an interesting intersection of geology and people. And something that I also think is cool, as you look over here, and here are other little old lake levels from times when it was even higher than before Los Angeles started diverting the flow. So, wow, it's fascinating what you can kind of uncover just by these environmental changes. Not unlike the blog post from last month, where we think about how changes to environments can actually reveal fascinating geologic events.
That's right. That's right.
Wow. Well, now I understand how those incredible tufa towers form. Should we hop to the next leg of our geologic road trip?
Let's do it, Graham. I'm ready.
All right. What's our next stop?
Yes, Carlsbad Caverns. I think folks who watch the Rockin Pop-Up regularly will be like, geez, you're talking about caves again? Like, we've gone over caves enough times. But no, Carlsbad Caverns are unique in their formation. And so they're a little bit different than other caves that we may have talked about around Santa Cruz. The difference, the actual physical differences of Carlsbad are twofold. One of them is that the stalactites and the stalagmites, the speleothems that are in the cave, in some cases are weird mineralogy. They're not all calcite like you would expect. There's some of the mineral called gypsum, which just means we have a lot of sulfur in the cave, which is a little bit of a hint for how the formation is interesting of these caves. Also, you have these big rooms, like the actual rooms in the cave are much larger than you might expect from just normal karsting. So Graham, what gives? Well, first of all, we'll just give a quick primer on speleothems. Graham, you want to run through that quick because we've talked about this a bunch on the pod.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure many of our viewers are familiar with these, but just in case, so speleothems are these they're drips that sort of come down out of a cave right as water comes into a cave. It allows calcite to form, although like you said, in some cases here in Carlsbad Caverns, some of these are gypsum, which means they're made out of sulfur. And I would love to know where that sulfur comes from. I hope you'll let us know in a minute. But as these things drip out, they'll either sort of slowly grow down from the ceiling, or where drips hit the ground, they'll grow up from the ground. And sometimes they'll even intersect and become columns, where those stalactites and stalagmites kind of reach up and connect with one another. But Gavin, I'm losing it. How do we get these gypsum deposits here?
Well, Graham, for Carlsbad Cavern formation, it's about mixing oil and water.
Huh.
So Carlsbad Caverns are in New Mexico, and they're in a place called the Permian Basin. And the Permian Basin is famous for its oil. There's a ton of oil in the substrate and the subsurface, and people mine it all the time. But tens of millions of years ago, 12 million years ago, when the caves started forming, what happened was that you had this oil reservoir in the deep in the substrate. And something to know about oil is that there's a bunch of reduced sulfur, H2S. And so that sulfur, sulfide, was actually started to rise up into the overlying rock through little cracks in the rock. And so the sulfur from the oil kind of started to rise up, and it hit the water table. So the water table is just above the oil reservoir. And once it started mixing with the water table, that's this schematic here on the left, that H2S, the reduced sulfur, this is all chemistry, don't worry about it. It changed to from actually a liquid to a gas. It was then gaseous sulfur. And if anybody knows anything about sulfur, it turns into sulfuric acid. And if we know anything about our limestones don't like acid. Once acid hits them, they start to dissolve. And so this gaseous sulfur continued to travel up to the surface, but on its way, it kind of got stuck in all these cracks, and it dissolved all the rocks around them. And it dissolved these big caverns that you can now visit at Carlsbad Caverns. Pretty interesting chemistry story there.
That is wild. And I what a great way of thinking about mixing oil with water, making these acidic fumes that just wreak havoc on the overlying limestone. Wow, that's incredible. Well, we've looked at groundwater springs in Mono Lake. We've looked at underground caves. Let's go to Yellowstone for some hot earth. All right, it's going to be hot ground this summer in Yellowstone National Park. And one of the crazy things about it is we get these hydrothermal fluids right up on the surface. So we can actually make cave-like deposits above ground. And that's what's going on here at Mammoth Spring. We've got these steaming, boiling hot geysers. We've got these wild colored hydrothermal ponds. Gavin, Yellowstone is wild, but where does all that heat come from? How, the water at Mono Lake is not boiling hot. I've been there. So what's going on at Yellowstone?
Well, Graham, I want to take you through this. What would happen if you took the United States, the actual crust of the United States, and put it over Hawaii? We don't have to wonder about that because it has happened. Yellowstone is literally a huge hotspot similar to the Hawaiian island chains, only it's underneath the United States. So you might hear people be like, when's the next big volcano going to happen over Yellowstone? And that's because there's a huge body of magma beneath Yellowstone National Park that's sending up both magma and these weird hot fluids to the Earth's surface, right, Graham?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's just incredible. And that's right. You've got this big kind of like boiler sitting beneath Yellowstone. Yellowstone is this kind of lower area amongst the mountainous region, it's saying. We call it a caldera. A caldera is where you have a big volcanic eruption, and the basement of it, because you lose all that magma from there, collapses back down and makes a shallow little bowl. And so in this caldera, you've got hot molten rock at the bottom of it, and waters are sort of circulating through it. You've got this, hot water percolator that's running warm water, up to the surface and heating this place. And like you said, it's this hot spot that reaches deep down into the mantle. It's this big, sort of structure that's bringing heat from deep down up to the surface. And we can actually see that this has gone on through time. So Gavin, you mentioned folks are like, when's the next big eruption going to be? And the answer is not for a while, but we also don't really know. Because the Yellowstone hotspot, or the Yellowstone super eruptions, have happened over the last 2 million years, but they're just the latest occurrence of this hotspot volcanism that's been going on for over 16 million years. As the North American plate, the continental crust has been sliding over this hotspot. And so you're moving the crust over this hot point. And so as the crust moves this way, your areas of volcanism shift in the opposite direction. And so Yellowstone has had 3 super eruptions since 2 million years ago when it all started. The most recent super eruption was 600,000 years ago, so a long ways back, not any time within, memorable human time scales. But they were really incredible and left some of these really thick volcanic deposits. Like this is part of the Lava Creek Tuff. This is called Tuff Cliff, hundreds of feet of just thick volcanic erupted material. And so as you go around Yellowstone, you see all these incredible features that come from volcanism. And so you've got these mountains made out of the volcanic rock rhyolite. You've got these lakes with geysers around them that are the residuals of eruptions. And so you've got this volcanic stuff going on, but when there aren't eruptions, hasn't been an eruption there for 200,000 years, but you have all this heat. So Gavin, how's Yellowstone, dealing with this heat? How's it, so to speak, letting off its steam?
Well, Graham, I kind of did this experiment this morning when I turned my kettle on. When you put some water into a basin, in my case a kettle, but in this case the rocks above Yellowstone, and you heat it up for a while, it creates steam and the hot water boils and it shoots out of the surface, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so you get these things like geysers and these mud pots with this boiling, steaming water. But Gavin, I don't know about your kettle, but my kettle doesn't shoot boiling water 100 feet into the air. So there's got to be something special about these geysers. What's going on in them?
Well, the geyser, what happens is that you have the water and it's stuck down in these little tiny sort of crevices. And as it's going up through these crevices, it's getting stuck in the places where they're small, basically, where it can't be boiled to the surface. But as you keep heating them, the fluid pressure in those crevices kind of builds up. And it takes a very specific amount of time, given the same amount of heat over time, to get past the pressure needed to actually shoot out from the surface. So you're building pressure as you're heating, and then you overcome the pressure you need to actually shoot it up through the surface.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. So you overpressurize this, and then by the time it's got enough strength to break through, it's got so much power behind it that it just rockets up into the air. And that's how you get these incredible things like all these geysers that just shoot jets of boiling water.
That's exactly.
It's pretty remarkable, if you ask me.
Yeah, Graham, it's a really cool geologic feature, but a bad design for a kettle. So good point.
That is a good point. I'm glad my kettle doesn't work quite like a geyser. Well, this is a lot of hot magma chambers and recent volcanism. Let's say we cool down a little bit, come back home to California, just to our sort of regional backyard, and stop at one of my favorite national parks, Pinnacles National Park. And you might be like, yeah, sure, Graham and Gavin, this doesn't look like a volcano to me, but believe us, it was just 23 million years ago. And so now what we have left over are those volcanic rocks and all this awesome evidence of faulting that now looks like these steep cliffs and that you can see in the distance of it. And in some of the main regions of the park, you've got these tall spires, the pinnacles of this old volcanic rock. And so the best way to look at how these things formed and know that they're actually volcanic in origin, right? This doesn't look like a volcano, but we can look at the rock itself. So we get up close and we see that we've got these rhyolite lava flows. We've got these pyroclastic flows with all sorts of chunky stuff in them where it's picking up rock from next to it. And we can tell that these are volcanic rocks that have this fine tuff with bigger rocks mixed in there. And these form from pyroclastic flows, which is what you get when you really blow the lid off of a volcano. So sometimes they'll have lava flows where the lava will pour out and flow down the side of the volcano. And sometimes they explode and throw debris. And so when you have these big explosive debris-filled eruptions, that's how you can incorporate these chunks of rock as it's all tumbling down the slopes. But Gavin,
Graham.
oh
So
yeah, go ahead.
I just want to make sure I understand that. So you're telling me that the pyroclastic flows are the ash itself.
Uh-huh.
You said pyroclastic flow. So the pyroclastic flow is the ash, and then tuff. What is a tuff again?
So that's a great question. Tough isn't just when you're having a hard day and getting through it. Tough is what happens when you take this hot ash and you let it cool down together and it welds itself together. All that heat from the ash is enough for that rock to fuse together. And so the ash is really fine, and then it falls down and it settles on the land, and it's still hot, and it fuses together and forms a cement around all this other stuff. And that cemented ash is what we call tuff.
Wow. Okay. So in Pinnacles, you can see the lava flows and the ash itself. So this is definitely a volcano. We've checked the boxes.
This is definitely a volcano. But Gavin, the coolest part about Pinnacles is that it has a twin.
Oh my goodness, a twin. You're telling me that this happened in two different places?
I'm telling you that it happened in the same place. That 23 million years ago, there was one volcanic field that now today has been split into Pinnacles and Nenach Volcano. Now, Nenach Volcano is in Southern California. And as we know, Pinnacles is really close to us here in Central California. And so what moved Pinnacles hundreds of miles north after they erupted 23 million years ago? Well, Gavin, if this isn't a classic California geology moment, the San Andreas Fault happened. So, Gavin, how did the San Andreas Fault stir up trouble for Pinnacles and Nenach?
Well, I don't know. Let's look at this map. Okay, so we have a bunch of gray rocks coming through this. We have the Serengeti batholiths, and then we have the similar gray rocks down in the south. So you're telling me that basically you had this volcanic ridge that was bifurcated, cut by the San Andreas, and now it's moved one set of the ridge up to just south of Santa Cruz and the other down in Southern California?
That's right. So you've got Nenach down here, and we've got right around down here, and we've got Pinnacles up around here. And so what happened was, as the San Andreas Fault carried the western coast of North America, the western coast of California, up into the northwest, it brought up a bunch of this rock from the south and took it up to the north in what we call the Selenian block. And so Nenach was perfectly placed to get half of it, the Pinnacles part, sheared away from it. And there's a bunch of faults through the area that attest to this. And we do know that the San Andreas Fault runs right through Pinnacles. And so it brought all that rock up to here. And so I feel like Pinnacles is really quintessentially California. It captures, this ancient volcanism in Southern California. It captures the action of the San Andreas Fault. And I really do think it is a gem. I'm really glad that it was, that it officially became a national park not too long ago. I think only like 10 years ago or so.
Wow, what a cool landmark. It's so close to home. We've basically gone out and back today.
Yeah. So what do you think? Do you think we've done justice to the great geologic landmarks of the Western US?
Well, we've definitely stopped at a bunch of them. We've looked at some really cool ones, and I'd say these are several of the most unique ones. So
yeah, they're pretty special. Well, I think we've done our job. And so for next month, I hope you all will be able to join us as we get off of the land. We're going to cool off in the ocean and get as cool as we possibly can by diving down to the ocean floor.
Oh gosh, Graham, June's going to be a hot one. Let's go to the ocean. I like that idea. And we'll just swim really deep. We'll go to the bottom of the ocean and see all the things that geologists have learned about the bottom of the ocean.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it.
I can't wait. Thanks for that, guys. I have a lot of new inspiration for where I want to go this summer. I already know I'm going to go near arches. So that will be an interesting lens to look at that space from. Do you have any other recommendations that you didn't get to today?
Oh man, there are so many. Graham, you have any?
The one that's really near and dear to my heart is Craters of the Moon National Monument up in eastern Idaho. I think that is incredible. That is the youngest volcanic rock in the contiguous 48 states. So obviously there's younger volcanic rock in Alaska and Hawaii. The Craters of the Moon is it's some of it's like less than 10,000 years old. It's super, or I shouldn't say it's the youngest volcanic rock, but it's the youngest basalt lava flow. So that was the last time we had a flood basalt erupt on the continent. And it really is a lunar landscape. I think it's awesome.
I think we talked about it in one of the pop-ups before too. I don't know if it was caves or I don't know. It's
Yeah, because they've got lava tube caves there, which are pretty special.
cool. What about you, Gavin?
Well, you got me thinking about really, really young volcanic flows. And Lassen National Park is another really cool one if you're into the volcanic flavor of geology. Actually, the youngest volcanic rock in California, maybe in the contiguous United States, definitely in California, is a flow on Lassen Peak. And it's this like really cool, very, very black, very, very young looking rock. So lots of cool ones to see, and Lassen's a really, really nice.
Yeah,
place.
lots of cool stuff to see, not too far from home too. You don't even have to put too many miles on your vehicle to see these great geologic landmarks. Cool. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for our monthly Rockin Pop-Up, and we will see you again next month in June to learn about the ocean floor, which I'm really excited about. And just another plug, as I did last month, that the museum's now open. We were closed for quite a while, but we are now open, and we're also celebrating Santa Cruz Museum Month, which we're doing with a bunch of other local organizations. And we're offering free admission all month long in celebration of these great organizations that share culture and history and nature and art with our community. And so we're celebrating, and we hope to see you again soon. So have a great day.